let me use some examples to illustrate for you the difference between first, second, and third kind. How many of you know what this is? Seen one of these before? This one belonged to my father. It's my father's slide rule. How many of you know how to use one of these? No idea, right? Or how about this? How many of your children know how to use one of these? Oh, forget it. At that point, probably not a single one. Now, I want to ask you some questions about this slide rule. Do you think that this slide rule is very accurate? Well, of course it is. Do you think the numbers are in the right place? Absolutely. Do you think the customer who bought this slide rule was satisfied with it throughout his use? My father was very satisfied with this slide rule. In fact, the company that made this slide rule, they didn't really stop there. They moved to service encounters of the second kind. And they said, well, we understand you want a slide rule, but how would you like it? And of course, people say, well, I like it my way, I like it different. So this company came out with a whole range of slide rules. You can get slide rules in metal, you can get them in plastic. In fact, you can get the log trig, you can get the pocket trig, the pocket log, you can get the business pocket rule. Any way you'd like it. How would you like it? We'll do it for you. And you know what? The customers were delighted. But let's go back to the original slide rule again for a second and check out who made this piece of equipment. If we look right here, it says this was made by a company called Pickett. A Pickett slide rule. Have any of you heard of the Pickett computer? Never have. Me neither. How about the Pickett calculator? Have you? I haven't seen one either. Why not? What happened? What happened to Pickett? They did such a good job here, and they didn't get into the conversation with the customer called not just how do you want the slide rule, but instead, hey, what do you want to become? So they're not in it at all. Oh, and by the way, how many slide rules do you think Pickett is selling today? I don't think very many. Now, unfortunately, some of the real examples that illustrate this are some of the biggest failures. The trains in America run today because they're subsidized by the federal government. Well, why? What happened? You know, the trains, very accurate, they ran on time, they could get you from point A to point Z. They were doing a very good job right here. And then people said, you know, I'd like to ride in a dining car. I'd like to sleep in a sleeping car. I'd like to ride in a touring car with a glass top. And the train companies happily obliged. Service encounters of the second kind. But the train companies never really got into the conversation called, what do you want to become? Or they would have heard the customers say, we want to become people who can travel very, very quickly from one city to another. The train companies never got into the conversation to realize that they weren't in the train business. They're in the transportation business. And because they weren't in that conversation, they never made the investment in airplanes. And there was a time when the train companies were perfectly positioned to make that investment, but they didn't. And today, they roll on the rails only due to subsidy of the federal government. Now let me give you a couple of other hypothetical examples about organizations that maybe should consider quite seriously getting into this kind of service encounter. Take, for example, a large brewery. And let's put them in a part of the world where affluence continues to rise, like in Asia Pacific. You might find that there's a local brewery that's had a very dominant market share for a long time, but as the affluence grows, more and more of those imported brews are being imported into the country. And the market share of that original hometown brewer seems to be slipping and slipping and slipping down. Now, what kind of conversations is that brewery having with their customers? Well, primarily they're saying, what do you want? How much of our beer? Do you want it in glasses? Do you want it in bottles? Do you want it in cans? Do you want it? How do you want it? Boom, and we'll ship it to you what time? Maybe, if they're imaginative, they're in a service encounter of the second kind. And they're saying, well, how would you like it? Would you like us to deliver it after 2 a.m. so it doesn't interrupt your customer traffic? Would you like us to refrigerate it at our site and bring it to you cold? Would that be helpful? Would you like us to change the financing terms a little bit to be, well, that's just a service encounter of the second kind. How do you want it? But do you think this brewery has ever really thought about getting into a service encounter of the third kind? Going up to the customer and saying, hey, what do you want to become? Now, can you imagine if they went up to a karaoke lounge owner and said, what do you want to become? Or they went to a new restaurant owner and said, what do you want to become? Or they went to one of the country clubs and went to the food and beverage manager and said, what do you want to become? Do you think that any of those people would answer the question, I want to become somebody who buys your beer? No, I don't think so. Do you think they just say, I want to become somebody who buys your beer and gets it in split cases? Of course not. They would say things like, I want to become the most popular karaoke lounge in town. Or I want to become the most profitable restaurant in town. Or I want to become the most flexible and dynamic, innovative outlet within a country club in town. Now that's an interesting point of view, isn't it? If I were the brewery, I would realize that I've seen more karaoke lounges and restaurants and country clubs come and go than probably anybody else in town. And from my point of view as their brewery supplier, I probably have an insight that the average owner doesn't have. I know why they succeed, and I know why they fail. Being in a conversation with any of those owners about what they want to become, gosh, the brewery could probably add a lot of value, could build a very strong sense of partnership together. But do you think the brewery is in that conversation? I don't know. Do you think they should be in that conversation? Now that's an interesting question. If the owners started saying, we need your help, well, that leads right to consultancy services. Now, consultancy services is a whole new business unit. It's not the same as brewing beer, but do you think consultancy services can be profitable? Of course they can. Do you think you'd have loyalty with those owners over time? Of course you would. But before you can get there, it takes a commitment to enter into this kind of service encounter. Let me give you one more example. I travel a lot and I stay in a lot of hotels. Now, have you ever heard of a hotel that asked the people who stay there, what do you want to become? Not at all. They say, where do you want to stay? What night are you checking in? What night are you checking out? And do you like 2 beds or do you want a king-size bed? What kind of wine do you want in your room? Well, that's strictly service encounter of the first and second kind. But if a hotel asked me, what do you want to become? I, as many other people in business, would probably say, I want to become somebody incredibly efficient in business. I want to become somebody who can get more done in my regional or global business affairs every single day. Now, if we enter into that kind of a conversation together, the hotels might realize that in the evenings, you know, when you're sitting back and watching TV because there's nothing else to do, the business center is closed, that would be an ideal time for me in my business to contact other people in my business who are in other cities. In fact, I could actually have a little conference going between maybe the home office in one region of the world and myself in the hotel I'm staying in, and then one of my colleagues or my manager who's in yet another city. And the most convenient thing for us would be if we had some good video conferencing facilities. You know, there are video conferencing facilities, but you have to go down to the local telecommunications authority, or you've got to go to one of the big office buildings. Who wants to go there at 11 o'clock at night? Or if it's convenient to somebody in another city, who wants to go at 2 in the morning? They're not even open at 2 in the morning, but the hotel is. But do you think there are any hotel chains who are presently in that conversation, who are making that kind of investment? It's a reinvention. It's not new pillows. It's video conferencing facilities. If there was a chain that got into this kind of conversation, do you think that their customers would become increasingly loyal? Well, sure, I'd say to you if you were my colleague, hey, you have to stay in that hotel. Why? Because we're going to have a video conference tonight, and they've got the facility, they've got the hookup. It's the only place to stay. But to get there, the hotel can't think like this, or just like this. It's a new way of thinking, like this.